This is the Freeheel Life Podcast, episode number 135. I'm your host, Josh Madsen, coming at you from the Freeheel Life shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. Happy Monday, everybody. Good to be back and seeing the weeks tick down until ski season starts again. So, happy to be here. Had a fun episode last week, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. But first, some newsroom and notes, and just kind of want to bring you guys up to speed with what we got going on. We're still cranking here over in Salt Lake at the shop. We've been talking a lot about the Protector skis. Batch number 2 is still live. There are a few pairs left in that second batch of pre-order that we are going to be preparing for the upcoming fall. Would love to have you on a pair of our skis. Also want to make sure it's a good fit. So if it's something it might pique your interest and you're curious in learning more, we've got a couple podcast episodes, some resources on the website to get in front of you. And if it gets to the point where you want to talk to someone in person, you can reach out to customer service at freeheellife.com, and one of us will reach out to you and have a nice discussion to see if it is in fact the correct ski for you. Also, we've got some rad new merch that's coming in, and I'm super excited about that because we've been designing some really cool stuff and would love to have you represent the Freeheel Life and let people know what's up. It's not really Telemark stuff per se, right? But there's some cool artwork. That's what I'm excited about, and I'm always a big fan of the art pieces that we've done in the past, and we're just trying to keep up with the growth. Sometimes we haven't been good at keeping up with how much support we actually get. So we're trying to up our game and make sure that we are able to produce the things that we need to get it out there to you. So thank you for your support. Every little bit helps, even listening to this podcast, which I very much appreciate. And it's good to know that you're out there wherever you are around the world. So, all right. Well, I mentioned that I had a good discussion. That's about where we're at. Having conversations with myself every week and then putting it out on the internet for you to listen to. But last week I kind of got into a listener, Bobby T, sent in a question sort of about my concept of leading maybe a roadmap to a single Telemark norm. I'm always talking about, the concept of, we need to sort of centralize our boot and bindings, the way we fasten to the ski. And, he sent that question in, and I did my best to kind of just off the cuff, hey, here's what I think, here's kind of my thoughts on the subject. And in a good way, I got some feedback. I got a couple of emails from some people I'm going to read here and wanted to share those and kind of respond to those. And then also I was able to kind of find some source material of maybe where that question came from after doing a little bit of digging. And I wanted to, it helped me understand maybe what the question, original question maybe was. I didn't have all the pieces of the puzzle maybe from who was asking the question and the conversation that was happening elsewhere. So we're going to kind of dig into that as well. So I kind of want to start off with the couple emails that I got, and you as well, if you have any, especially after this podcast, maybe you've listened to part 1 of this discussion and sort of wanted to throw in your ideas, or maybe you're just getting around to listening to it, or maybe something you're going to hear in this podcast. Always love to hear your thoughts. I think this is a great forum, with putting the podcast out, looking to help spark discussion amongst people, and then amongst people that are actually going, consumers, but also, as we talk about manufacturers and other people that are involved in the process of making equipment or decision makers and that kind of thing. So this first This first email I'm going to read is from Dave in Colorado. It says, I enjoy your podcast, especially the gear discussions. Regarding today's episode, I'm on board with you. The quote-unquote controversy over 75 millimeter versus NTN is at this point just sort of ridiculous, and that a greater variety of NTN boots is the thing that will move Telemark forward from here. One thing I thought you undersold in this episode is the need for a lighter NTN boot, something like a 3-buckle TX on a diet. It is a minor point, but it was about 30 minutes before you got to this, and then I felt like you didn't quite nail it. I understand and accept your point that the bulk of Telemark gear is being used for lift-served skiing, but hasn't the T2 been historically Scarpa's highest-selling tele boot? There are some great long-distance tours in both North America and Europe, but who wants to tackle any of those with TX Pro? Not me. Even the TX isn't quite the boot, quite the right thing for big mileage days with a pack. And yes, an NTN boot in the T3, T4 class would really round out the line. The bottom line is that Scarpa's fractured Telemark boot family just doesn't make sense at this point. Anyhow, keep fighting the good fight. I appreciate all that you do for our choice of the turn. So thanks, Dave. That's really... I think that's a good synopsis. And I think, honestly, I think you make a good point about the T2, and it's kind of funny that I definitely took a long time to get to some of that stuff. I think it's a fairly, as you all know out there, kind of a complex topic. So first off, I want to say I 100% agree with you that something like a 3-buckle TX on a diet totally should exist. I actually completely agree with that. And even an NTN boot in that T3, T4 class, that's cool. And you kind of bring up something, I don't know, I didn't really bring that up, I don't think, in the first, in last week's podcast, was sort of, I brought up sort of the meadow skipping, rolling hills, sort of XCD class of Telemark. And I think what you're sort of talking about is these long tours. I mean, I think of like, classics like the Haute Route in Europe, or Redline Traverse, or something like, Eastern Sierra kind of stuff. And I'm sure there's many, many others. Even somebody doing like a hut trip, 10th Mountain Year from Colorado, 10th Mountain Division, that system of huts, and maybe you're doing some bigger descents, but maybe a lot of it's just like handling pack weight and getting in some miles, but you prefer not having the option to lock down the heel, and that's it. But I totally agree with you in terms of, I think that's really, and I think this is sort of where people sort of chimed back in response to the podcast last week, was this idea that, I'm missing the point of this lightweight touring boot. I get it 100%. So I'm going to try and tackle that a little bit in this podcast, about sort of my position on that, and maybe how it all fits in, in terms of how I look at it. So I'll get into that a little bit later, but to your point with the T2, 100%. Yeah. T2, I think, I mean, I don't have the statistics completely dialed in. I do believe you're probably correct that the T2, much like the G3 Targa, that setup, like when you see used setups still out there from the early mid 2000s up to like maybe like 05, 07, you're talking about a G3 Targa and a T2, blue T2 2-buckle boot. My thought on that is, I think it was a time and place. I don't know. I'm not saying that boot doesn't have a place, or something like a modernized version of the T2 might not have a place in today's Telemark world, because it does. And I think you said it in there, like a non-fractured boot line that has a wider variety. I think that's what we're all trying to kind of get at. So yeah, I mean, more, in my opinion, the more boots, the merrier. And maybe I wasn't clear with that in the podcast, and That's sometimes I wander, people, and I appreciate you even anyone out there hanging in there to some of these conversations, because there's a lot of rabbit holes off to the sides, and I may need a podcast or 3 or 4 to get it done, and all your feedback helps. So to your point, T2, totally agree. I think that's a great option for us. I don't know. I personally think that the 3-buckle TX on a diet, which I think is really what people expect from like a touring boot, in the sense of how we are, Colorado, Utah, when we say touring, we're thinking about it like that. Like a NTN version of a T3, T4 maybe is more where I would kind of see a modern version of the blue T2 that you're probably referring to. So hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, thanks for the support, Dave. I really appreciate it. And thanks for sending that email in. So the next email I got is from Mark not up, I guess over on the right coast in Brewster, Mass. Says, I'm a loyal podcast listener and a quote unquote old Telemark skier who started Telemark just prior to NTN becoming widely available, probably started in 2008. I agree that for the most part, everything should go to NTN for what would be considered downhill skiing, either in the resort or the backcountry. I think you finally hit on the need for 75 millimeter at the end of the podcast, especially discussing Volet and their keeping with the 75 millimeter standard for their bindings. The real use for the switchback or hardwire is for the light setup for quote unquote meadow skipping, where you are out in the hill country and touring using fish scales, but need something better than NNN, which is New Nordic Norm binding, and boot setup to be comfortable skiing some steeper terrain where a real Telemark turn is required. Volet makes some skis that work well for this, as well as Rosignol and Fisher work well with the Scarpa T4 or a leather boot with 75 millimeter 3-pin toe. However, Rotofella has come up with a new system called Explore System that is a tech toe type binding for light skis, and companies like Alpha and Alpina are making the boots to work with this system. Initial results seem to indicate that this new Explore, so it's XPLORE system, with a stiff plastic boot is good for making telly turns as the T4 and hardwire setup. I wanted to mention this because I think these are two distinct styles of skiing that fall under the Telemark turn, and the boot and binding systems for these two distinct categories are different. I have a downhill setup, NTN Original Outlaw with crispy shiver boots, and I'm looking to get a new meadow skipping setup, likely with the new Explore system, to replace my XCD NNN backcountry binding with NNN Rosignol boots. It would be great if you could get either Scarpa or Crispy reps on the podcast to talk boots and the future of boots. Mark, and he says, love the podcast and all you do for Telemark skiing. Keep up the good work. So, Mark, thank you so much. This brings up an interesting point. So I think we're kind of all on the same page. Kind of funny. It seems like I just waited too long to talk about 75 millimeter. Maybe I did that on purpose so you guys would all hang around and see what I'd say. Or maybe I just did it by accident. The latter is probably what happened. This kind of brings up an interesting point. It seems like we're sort of all on the same page, Mark and I here. He does sort of bring up the setups I was sort of talking about: Scarpa T4 leather boot, 75 millimeter 3-pin toe, fish scaled XCD style skis. This Explore thing, this is an interesting topic. I have not tackled it. I have not skied it yet. I probably need to try this. It's interesting because, again, it's very, and I think Mark's talking about it in here in terms of what the system is, and I get it. Because I know, and I was talking to Rotofella back in the day when they were coming up with this thing, and I kind of didn't, I kind of lost touch with it. I knew, they were always trying to find something that would sort of work better for touring. And when they say touring in Norway, at least from my experience, a lot of it's like this long, rolly hill, kind of walking that we're talking about. It's definitely more the XCD style thought process. In fact, when I would go visit Rotofel at the factory and we would talk, I was always very surprised that the Freedom NTN binding was by far outselling the Free Ride. And it was really just because, it was a little bit lighter and easy to tour with, and I mean, not to say like the Free Ride was not designed with the intent of maybe doing those longer hauls. So the Explorer system is kind of interesting because it doesn't, can you make a telemark turn on it? It sounds like it. It looks like it. It definitely looks more, it's in that XCD class, and it doesn't look cross-compatible with like a tech NTN or TTS system. I believe it's kind of its own thing. Correct me if I'm wrong. Send me more information, and I'll try to get a pair. I mean, honestly, it'd probably be kind of a fun thing to do, like make a video of going out on that stuff and seeing what kind of telemark turns are possible on it. Again, and I appreciate these emails coming in because it seems like we're all on the same page. We're talking about distinct like Mark said, distinct categories of boot and binding systems under the telemark turn. I like how he worded that because to me that makes a lot of sense. Like, I mean, you can make a telemark turn on anything. You can do it on skinny, edgeless Nordic skis, but is that there's larger questions, and I think that's a lot of what we're trying to get at is what is the objective, and do all of these pieces fit in? And secondly, do they all fit in under the word telemark? Because I think that's where it kind of goes wrong a lot of times is we use the word telemark, but we're not all necessarily saying the same thing. So thanks for the email, Mark. I really appreciate you bringing up the Explorer system. Super interesting. I agree. From looking at it, it looks better than NNN, which is it's a Nordic system. But I'd love to kind of look into it a little bit. Again, it's probably a quiver thing, kind of a quiver play. Although I'm old school. I like the 3-pin, so might be hard to get me on the Explorer system, but we'll see. Anyways, very good point, and appreciate you bringing that up. Okay, so those were a couple of emails I wanted to pick out that came in, sort of get back on those. I think they bring up some good points. Obviously help calling out the fact that sometimes I take a while to get to the point, which I'm always trying to do better with. So here's where kind of the meat and potatoes of this comes. And part of the reason I wanted to at least do a part 2, I'm sure we could literally do like 100-part series of this discussion. But I also wanted to say, I'm glad the discussion is happening in the greater sphere of telemark discussion. And that's cool. Also, I want to say, as I kind of head into this part of the conversation, I am incredibly humbled and grateful that you all that are listening are listening. It means a lot to me. I'm obviously very passionate about telemark. I think it's the coolest thing ever. I have since I was 14 years old when I started it many, many years ago. And I just really appreciate the fact that, I mean, it's incredibly humbling to get on the internet and see people talking about the podcast and sort of responding to it. And to me, that's, I don't go digging around for that stuff. And I did last night kind of in preparation for this and was actually really surprised and really appreciate the support. Even if we have differing opinions on stuff, the fact that the podcast is getting people talking even more than maybe they already were, or starting a conversation, that makes me happy. That's what this is all about. So, so I kind of went and did some digging to try to understand. So Bobby T was the guy who sent in the question. We've had some correspondence over the years through email and whatnot. And I know that he's part of sort of a small group of people that are chatting over on Backcountry Talk forum, which Craig Dostie has had for many, many, many years, and it's sort of a dark corner of the Telemark universe. No, but in all seriousness, the IQ level of most people in that forum is probably way higher than what I can handle on most days. So, I think it gets pretty technical in a lot of ways, and I have so much respect for that. But also, there's some stuff in there, like it's like when I talk to Dostie. I mean, Dostie and I are great friends. Craig Dostie, if you don't know, he runs telemarkskier.com for us, and I mean, the guy's been around forever, but he's a gear nerd. I am not. I'm passionate about gear, but I'm not like that. So anyways, this forum is definitely, if you really want to get the nitty gritty of question answer, people really thinking about this on like an engineering level, it's a good place to go. So I thought I'd go kind of to the source. I went looking on there because I knew from the original question that came in there was a thread somewhere. So I went looking for it, and I found it. And if you want to go check it out, I'll put a link to the forum. It's on Backcountry Talk on earnyourturns.com, and it's under the UTN Universal Telemark Norm thread. And honestly, this kind of helped me. I probably should have. I didn't even think to read this. So prior to doing last week's podcast, but it was really enlightening and kind of fun to kind of look at it. And honestly, I'm kind of glad I waited, because now there's some response to the podcast, which I was even more happy to see, that it kind of sparked even some more conversation. So one of the more recent posts that was a couple days ago was by a person, JTB. I wanted to start here, and then I can kind of go back. And today I just wanted to go through a couple of these and just kind of pick through them and sort of riff off of what was being said. And just so maybe I can clarify some things from my position, and also just kind of give you a sense of what the thread's about. So this was a couple days ago. It said, I think Madsen's perspective makes sense for someone who, one, skis and sells to skiers who primarily at the resort. 2, is in the business of selling what exists, not in influencing the direction of the next generation of gear, or maybe more generously is realistic about the limits of possible development. And he continues on. In that sense, Bobby Too Slow, you may have asked for one thing and gotten another. I suspect you're interested in where should the gear go standard wise, and Madsen did a podcast on where has the gear gone. He's not interested in whether TTS or TTN is better for a specific use case, or whether a unified standard would help serve those use cases. He's just describing the fact that NTN is clearly a more widely adopted standard. He's not interested in holding out for a lightweight, high range of motion boot for touring, though he mentions that interest exists. He's telling people what to buy now that won't be obsolete in 5 years, whether or not such a boot ever comes out. All of this makes sense for someone who is selling gear that exists, not designing gear that doesn't yet exist. But I agree with Dostie that having people like Madsen supporting the industry is a huge win. So thank you, JTB. This one, I wanted to start with this because what's kind of interesting to me is sort of the perspective of maybe how someone's seeing what I'm saying and then sort of putting it on here. I think it's interesting. First off, thank you for agreeing with Dostie. I hope that whatever we're doing at Freeheel Life and the various projects I have going on are helping, for sure. I mean, that's the whole point. What's interesting is sort of this, and I hope I'm reading this right, but it seems fairly clear. It's this. I think to add some clarification, my perspective doesn't necessarily. I mean, I understand you're like, this dude owns a shop, and this is how he sees it, and and this is what he's doing. I think the biggest thing to bring up here is oftentimes I think we're further along in the progress of things. And I tend to be like, sometimes I think this conversation is talking about sort of like a super freeway system, and like we're more on like a dirt road with a couple paved sections. That's kind of how I look at Telemark, and that's how I build my business. Is maybe the fact that I'm talking about things in a certain way, it's more because I'm looking at things in a building block sort of way, based on the experiences and resources that are available in front of me and what I see in the greater system around us, like other manufacturers, retail, whatever. So, like the idea that I'm not interested in TTS or TTN is kind of strange to me. Like when I read that, obviously you're entitled to your opinion. I mean, you can think about it however you want, but I mean, I actually agree that TTS, Telemark Tech System, and Telemark Tech, NTN Tecto, like for sure, these are important. A lot of my perspective comes from the people that generate the business, which is interesting. I think it's less opening Freeheel Life has actually been an interesting experience in the fact that creating a Telemark specific space for people to buy equipment and get more knowledge. It's actually been interesting because I think that Freeheel Life as a retail store in a lot of ways is a lot less about an agenda that I'm trying to push or an idea that I was trying to push, and more an evolution of seeing what the needs of the people are. And it's fascinating. And what it kind of reminds me in terms, just to talk about TTS, I remember Craig Dostie showing me Mark Langel's very first Olympus Mountain Gear TTS. Like literally, this was like 2011. I remember seeing it at an outdoor retailer show on snow, and Dostie comes up, and we weren't as tight back then because we didn't know each other that well. And he's like, check this out. He's like, this is the future. And I literally looked at him and I'm like, nope. And it's kind of been like a funny look back for both of us over the years. And in some ways, I think it opened the door for so many things to come, like Lynx, Majo. That has been really cool to watch. The popularity of Tecto in terms of just the bulk of the people wanting it just isn't there, at least from what I've seen statistically speaking from like a retail space. I mean, there's an argument if we were a backcountry shop that sold Telemark, which was the traditional model of retail that sold Telemark gear, maybe that would be different. But my perspective comes from being a Telemark specific retail store. And in that case, there seems to be not as much interest as you would think. And so oftentimes I think it's a much louder group on the internet than you would think. Now, that when I say all of this, it doesn't mean that I don't want TTS or I don't any sort of tech system or lightweight thing. I'm not generating those ideas because I own a shop, and I'm just trying. Of course, we want to sell stuff to people, but yeah, I mean, we're going to sell what's the most popular. So, anyways, that's kind of my perspective on that. The only other thing I wanted to sort of I thought that it was really interesting, just the concept. All of this makes sense. This is what the end of this. All of this makes sense for someone who is selling gear that exists, not designing gear that doesn't yet exist. So what's interesting about that, and just to give you just to kind of shed some light, is I've been part of the Scarpa boot project from the beginning. Essentially, I've been, 5 or 6 years being part of the process of testing the next generation of boots, however you want to look at it, and being one of a handful of testers that is out. I've traveled over to Europe and been part of that boot design, talking to people, bringing my data, my expertise, all of that to look forward. And again, what's interesting to me is I'm very much, I see your point, and I just wanted to, that wasn't sort of to tout like, I'm part of this thing, but it's more to just say, no, actually, I'm very concerned about the future. I mean, that's why I own a Telemark business, and why I'm so dedicated to this is from the perspective of future generations and protecting the turn. The idea, again, I'm much more of a brick builder, like I want to lay bricks down and make sure that the foundation's there. And I think the misperception a lot in the business of Telemark is that somehow we are much further along above the foundation, whereas most people think we're like, the foundation's there, we're building. And on the inside, where I'm looking at it from, there is no foundation in a lot of spots. There's a lot of holes, there's a lot of gaps, and I'm all about the future, but I also want to make sure that the current stuff is we're using those building blocks to create a stronger, more robust foundation. Again, paving the gravel road so that then we can speed up the process, And so Gear's all about that. So when we talk about looking into the future, I'm 100% dedicated to the future. But with progress without the present is impossible. So that's what I'm kind of talking about. And so I just kind of wanted to shed some light on that. And 100% when I'm in those talks looking at a future boot, I'm looking at, and I'll be 100% honest with all of you out there, when everyone's yelling for lightweight, I'm not anti-lightweight. I'm not even like pro only boot in the resort. What my philosophy and perspective is on that is that we've allowed so much lapse of time between the last iteration of boots to now that if we only focus on a small segment, which from where I'm looking at it, the smallest segment is the screaming group for the lightweight boot. And that's just data. I mean, honestly, like I'm a businessman. Like if that was the largest group, I would 100% be sitting down and being like, give me that first. But I don't think that's it. I think in order, and I would hate to see it happen where we make but I'm saying like culturally speaking, as manufacturers mixed with retailers, if we pushed for the wrong decision and we don't upgrade where we're at, we may be missing a block. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. Anyways, no offense taken by any means, JTB. Actually was a good opportunity for me to sort of clarify, because I think last week, it might have gotten jumbled. Sometimes I flow and go all over the place and gets a little complicated. So anyways, I am 100% dedicated to the future, but I am all about building upon fundamentals and looking at long-term survival. And so I think the long game is much more important than the short game. So kind of to go back to the original, literally what this whole thread is about is the thread was actually started by this guy, Bobby T, bringing it up, which was the gentleman that sent me the question to sort of riff off of. And it's funny that last one I just talked about, it says, I might have given him an answer that maybe he wasn't looking for. I think part of it was I was missing what this thread was about. And so it was like jumping into a conversation about something that like I didn't even know the premise, and that's totally my bad. So I apologize, because everyone knows hopping into a convo without any background is probably not the right thing to do. So I wanted to read the original post. This is back in 24 February 2022 about UTN, and I think he just to use some sort of moniker, Universal Telemark Norm. I essentially, well, let me read this, and I want to actually read the post so you get a sense of what it is. there's a notion mentioned frequently on the Great Freeheel Life podcast, thank you, that I strongly agree with. The variety of boot binding standards hurts the sport's growth. We need to do away with 75 millimeter NTN, TTN, TTS, and just have quote unquote Telemark. What does that mean, and how do we get there? For a new person, the choices are overwhelming, and for a manufacturer, it's an uncertain scene to invest big dollars into. Simplification would be really helpful. Every new Telemark boot sold should work with every new Telemark binding sold, and vice versa. The retail death of 75 millimeter gets things one step closer. So given where we are now, here's my vision, Bobby T's, for a universal Telemark norm, or quote unquote UTN. Many of these are already standard, just codifying it in one place. So now he breaks it down into boots and bindings and sort of a bullet point list. So boots, standard AT specific tech fittings at the toe at standard distance from the tip of the toe lug. 2, toe lug compatible with NTN spec toe cage, maybe a flat face in middle for toe bumper. Next, heel lug shelf compatible with heel throws, including Bishop step-in. Next, tele-specific AT style tech fittings at the heel. Removable or replaceable duck butt. Sole flex optimized for use with tech toes pivoting cage. And then cuff range of motion commensurate with weight. So a lot of this stuff is there. You know, some of the stuff he's bringing up, removable, replaceable duck butt, love that. Kind of similar to the Garmont Prophet or Scott, whichever version you're looking at. The biggest stuff, I'm not just, I'll throw this in here, not a fan of heel inserts. Don't see the point in that. It's a Telemark boot. I will always drive towards that direction. Trying to play the game, like we've already learned that lesson, in my opinion. I understand that there is an Alpine heel on a Majo or whatever, and I understand that some people out there may think that the future of Telemark resides in the idea that we have a boot that works with both AT and Telemark. I'm not a believer in that. We are all welcome to our opinions, but there's a reason that there is no longer a heel insert in Telemark boots except for Crispy. I mean, whole other episode we could go into, but not a fan of that. All the other stuff makes sense. And I think the thing Bobby hits on here that's very, very important is the idea of norms and specs. And honestly, I think a lot of the problems that have come up with NTN tech is because people have not discussed norms openly within the marketplace. And then you end up with all sorts of little weird things not happening. I mean, the story, if you are a faithful podcast listener and you've listened to where tech toe in NTN boots came from, the tech toe itself predated TTS and Telemark NTN tech. So you can imagine there's all sorts of weird little things that have not worked correctly. Because the good part is Mark Langell looked at that tech toe in that NTN boot and was like, well, I could make a binding that worked with this. And that's great. And it's obviously spurred other innovations. So look, sometimes accidents happen, right? And so in future NTN boots, my stance is I love all of this stuff minus, a couple things like the heel tech thing I'm not a fan of. Everything else, standardizing everything so that it works great, and especially AT spec tech fittings, because that opens it up for DIY guys to be able to use tech toes across the platforms if they want to buy the like a Dynafit toe or whatever. Love that. I'm just making sure I'm not missing anything here. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Bindings can have tech pins. Oh, I know what I was going to say. The boots. I think every Tele boot really, if it doesn't affect the cost, put the tech toe in there. I think that's great. I mean, I think that's been the biggest problem with the TX Comp, for instance, the fact that they couldn't get it in or wouldn't put it in. There's some controversy there. It has been done. I've skied a pair of TX Comps with Tech Toe in it, but it never went to market. I just think it's great to have as many features available as long as it doesn't affect the performance wherever you're using it. Okay, going on to bindings, Bobby T says, can have tech pins or NTN spec toe cage. Next, can attach it duck butt or reel heel. So actual NTN or TTS with like a heel throw. And can have optional tele specific AT style heel. Again, not a fan of that. Don't agree with it. Telemark is Telemark. Let's do it that way. And I know that sounds so like staunch, and somebody's probably screaming at their phone like, you're so dumb, that's the future. You know, it's not. Look, I'm just telling you from experience, it's not the way to go. Like, if a company wants to get involved with Telemark, have them make a Telemark boot, but let's not try to solve the problem through an Alpine company making a boot that works for both. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying, like, putting our energy there, I don't think is effective. So that's my 2 cents on that. He continues, boots made as described above will work with all new and legacy NTN bindings. They will work with TTN, like Lynx and Majo. Will work with TTS, like Olympus Mountain Gear or now Volet. Buying a new UTN boot will require no further investment if you already have NTN, TTN, TTS, or Bishop bindings. It is fully backwards compatible post 75 millimeters anyway. Having all new boots be identical in all the above attachment aspects will then free up the manufacturers to have their Telemark lines variety based on weight, stiffness, tourability. Kind of like the good old simple days of T1, T2, T3, etc. Thoughts. And then, so just on that note, I think this really cleared it up for me when I read this. I was like, okay, Bobby T, I don't even know why you're asking my opinion, man. No, I mean, I think really that's kind of what I was trying to get at too. And maybe I was a little verbose and kind of all over the place last week, but the idea of for me, it's fine tuning the boots that exist. And what I mean is, like I just mentioned, like the Tech Toe spec, for instance, we made these NTN boots in 2008 and forward. And you have to look, all the bindings that have been made, like the 22 Designs basically comes out with a better toe cage than the Rotofella Free Ride. Bishop sort of follows suit with that. You know, and you kind of have similar toes there and they work. But we don't want to eliminate, what we don't want to do is create a boot that doesn't work backwards, but improves things forwards in terms of usability. And I think that I'm 100% down with. What I don't want to see is making something new. Like that I 100% disagree with. For instance, what if a boot, you know, I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, it's like if someone were to come out with a boot that doesn't work with the number one or top 3 selling bindings, like Outlaw X or, you know, like you said, Bishop or something like that, and they only worked with certain other bindings, that to me would not make sense at all. So, part of this, I think, is just reconciling where things started and then where we're at now, and realizing that we've, like I said previously, it's not about not moving into the future as much as making a good long-term decision and making the necessary tweaks of the NTN platform to move forward in a future-proof sort of way, where that is, you know, he's calling it UTN, Universal Telemark Norm, but I mean, really, again, it's back to the same thing. It's Telemark. He's saying UTN and Telemark, in my opinion, are synonyms. They're the same exact thing. We're trying to achieve a boot that works with, these pass end TAN bindings and TTS and all that, and moving forward. So I agree. We just need to fine tune some of the specs and stuff like that. One of the things I really thought about after I started seeing some of this feedback too was, sometimes I think that people are saying, well, you should get Scarpa on here. I've had Kim Miller, Scarpa's North America CEO, on here. I haven't been able to track down Crispy or Scott at the highest levels. I'd love to have some people on there. I hate to say it. Most reps, most even retailers, and the majority of the manufacturers that make Telemark, well, there's 3 Telemark boot manufacturers. We're driving this thing. This conversation of what everyone's saying out there, this is much more of a driver in terms of understanding and complexity than anyone in a business, in Telemark boot business right now knows or understands. I can 100% say that with surety. So sometimes when I read through these threads and forums, it makes me laugh because, again, if you're not in the business of Telemark, like it's, and there's not many of us. And even some of the people that sell Telemark or make Telemark stuff, they don't even know what we're talking about. So there's a big disconnect there. And, so I think it's interesting to see maybe a businessman out there that telemarks and then gets on a forum and says, well, this is how you should run the business. Or an engineer that gets in and says, well, this is how you should do it. Duh. It's like, those things make me laugh because after having been in this for 20 years, I understand your frustration from the outside looking in. But again, we're on a dirt road. I would love to have you come lay pavement. Let's do it together. Okay. So don't think that there's an existing highway with signage. There is not. Do not think that there is a map. There are dead ends. Do not think that like A to B is like A to B in the regular world. It is not. So I just want to bring that up. If people want to see Telemark move forward into the future, we must focus on fundamentals. That is it. Get new people into the sport, help them simplify their decision making, and make good products that they will buy. And I think Bobby T, somewhere along this thread line, gets into sort of this idea of natural selection within the market. 100,000%. Let people spend their dollars where they're at. And that's kind of what I was saying with TTS and Telemark, NTN Tech, like Majo and stuff. You'd be surprised. Like, a lot of people don't necessarily want tech-toe stuff. So a lot of our perspective is determined by the space, that natural selection, if you will. So I thought I was going to be able to pick through a lot of these. I don't want to go too much deeper, but it's a very this is a very, very interesting conversation, and I think what I think maybe we should do, and it was mentioned inside of this forum, is, I think it would be interesting to see some sort of a panel discussion, and I would be willing to put that together. Maybe there's something I could do on our YouTube channel or something like that, or a podcast. I think the big thing is getting some sort of qualification of the people talking about this, because the wider variety of comments I think are great. Like, everyone's entitled to their opinion. Consumer, per engineer, whatever you are out there, I everything's valid. I want to listen to everybody's ideas. I do think it needs to get tempered with expertise and experience in order to produce a perspective that the majority of us can get behind to move forward. And I think that's incredibly important. The disagreements along the way are only going to produce better results. Strong debate, data-driven conversations are going to get us somewhere 100%. Again, if you haven't noticed, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. This is why industry needs to be built. And there's a lot of smart folks out there. And like I said, most of the people on this thread are way smarter than me. I'm sure a lot of them are engineers and doctors and all sorts of highly qualified individuals in their field. So that's probably why you don't see me poking around there too much. But anyways, that's all I got for today. I didn't really go as deep as I wanted to, but I hope that I was able to clarify a few things. In summary, I am dedicated to protecting the Tern and making it go into the future. And so whatever it takes to get it to the future, I'm into it. If that means lightweight boots and that's how we do it, cool. If it means making kids boots, cool. If it means making resort skier boots, cool. If it means making anything for anyone, that as long as we have a long-term objective and people get behind it, I'm into it. So, I've dedicated my life to this, my entire career, my entire adult life. And I try to look at it with everything in a way that is effective that way. So, anyways, thanks for listening today. I really appreciate you all. Hopefully that clarified a few points from last week's podcast. And I would love to hear your thoughts. Hit me up at podcast@freeheellife.com. As always, you can support us by going to freeheellife.com. New merch dropping soon. I hope to see many of you wearing some shirts and hats and stuff to help us get through the summer months and support the business. So much love and respect. And if you're on the socials, you can follow me at Josh Nomadson. And until next week, brothers and sisters of the Tern, keep protecting it until I talk to you next Monday, and spread Telemark always.